stack of books is starting to get a little ridiculous. Let's talk about some vintage science fiction hidden gems. Fair warning, some books were unintentionally harmed in the making of this film. As a science fiction fan who's still on my reading journey, I have been seeking out diamonds in the rough. You know what I'm saying? I'm going around to secondhand bookshops and trying to find books that I've never heard of that are secretly a total blast to read, even in this decade. And I'm having a hard time finding a whole lot of lists that include a lot of vintage secondhand store books that are just really good times to read. I find a lot of historically important lists, but not a lot of just super fun reads. So that's what I want to do in this video today. I want to include some of these books. Most of them are probably not historically important, but they were just really fun books to read in this era because I liked them. I want you guys to notice that I'm also using the word vintage, not classic, because I'm looking for those books that you find in secondhand bookshops, you know, the ones that probably aren't still in print, and the ones that don't have a UPC on the back cover. Now, UPCs were standardized in 1984-85, so that's the way that I'm using this definition. Last but not least, I wanted to go ahead and say that not all vintage books are, let's say, politically accurate and stand the test of time, if you know what I'm saying. So any book that I find that does stand the test of time is going to get my little hourglass stamp that I'm going to put on the screen here. So that said, let's get into this. I want to start with a book that I have been championing on my channel for a long time. I've mentioned it maybe a couple of times, but it definitely deserves the hourglass standing the test of time, and that is Inherit the Stars by James P. Hogan. This is the first of a trilogy, and the first two books are really fantastic. The third one a little bit less so. And this series is super fun and incredible. In the first setup of this novel, we discover a dead astronaut on Mars. Problem is, we're not missing anyone. And so as we do more investigation of this body, we discover that this body is 50,000 years old. We also discover that this body has a little bit more advanced technology than we do. And a lot more things go into the discovery of this body, leading us to some incredibly creative, fun revelations about our place in the solar system as humans. This story was so imaginative and fun, and it was easy for me to suspend my disbelief. Fair warning though, this book does have some hard science fiction in it, meaning that at least I'm gonna say the first half of the book really deep dives into scientific theories and the investigation of how we would date and investigate this dead body on the moon. And that might hold back some readers who just want a fun story, but if you're not stopped by that scientific discussion, then this series is definitely one that I would highly recommend. Next is Andre Norton's Daybreak 2250 AD. It also has an alternate title that you may be able to find it in the wild as Starman's Son. This book, while having an incredibly cheesy cover, is one that really captured my imagination. This book takes place in such a far-flung future that even the nuclear holocaust has been centuries ago, and humans have become regressed, and they're now living in tribal groups. We follow our main character in a coming-of-age story as he is preparing for the day when he takes over his dad's job, becoming the Starman, a man who explores this mysterious world and tries to find ancient technology that can be used by the tribe. However, when the day happens and he isn't picked for the Starman, he decides to go out on his own and prove that the decision was made poorly and that he too can handle the adventure. There are so many cool little tidbits in here hinting about what happened to the world, but never quite revealing exactly what went on. The best part about this book is that it is a standalone and it is a really fun, just superficial adventure that has a lot of deeper underlying layers if you decide you want to get into those. So I would definitely give this one the hourglass stamp of stands the test of time. This is one that I would definitely look out for if you haven't read it. Next on the list is Edmund Hamilton's The Star Kings. This is one that I picked up on a whim and a friend's recommendation. It also looks like the cover kind of looks like Tiger or Stars My Destination. This book is a really fun romp that follows a man named John Gordon in the 1970s who somehow ends up trading bodies with a prince of the future. The prince is trying to do some research about past and ends up swapping bodies. And of course, things go wrong and they're having trouble swapping back. In the meantime, John gets to take over this prince of the future's life, including his betrothed and his entire kingdom. There's a lot of misadventure here, as you can imagine. This book leans pretty heavily onto a lot of stereotypes, but it's more of a romance, space opera kind of a story. It's a fun and a little bit of a wish fulfillment for the author, but I had a good time with it and would still recommend this book. Next, we get into a book by Harry Harrison, and that is the Deathworld trilogy. Now, interestingly enough, I found this book as an entire trilogy, and ironically, if you don't find it, it is entitled Deathworld, Deathworld 2, and Deathworld 3. Very original titles, I know. And I've only read the first one of the trilogy. This story was a really fun adventure about humanity's attempt to conquer the universe. And there is one particular planet that they nickname the Deathworld that seems to be very intentionally aimed at evolving to destroy humans. And they have had a colony on this world now for several generations, and it seems to be getting better and better at killing humans. And nobody really knows why until one man goes there to try to find the truth himself. This one definitely has some elements of some psychic powers and may be more of a sci fantasy as many of the older vintage science fiction stories are, but I had a really good time with this one. It was a lot of hope for the future with a little bit of intrigue. I thought it was just a super fun adventure for the time. So if you are up for a kind of silly adventure, I would definitely recommend Deathworld 1. Next, we have a book by Olaf Stapleton, but it's not his primary main series. I found this Sci-Fi Masterworks edition of Sirius that I really related to. This book definitely gets the hourglass stamp of approval, as it definitely stands the test of time. This book follows a dog character who has been given human intelligence by a mad scientist. But instead of repeating Dr. Frankenstein's mistake, this mad scientist brings his creation home and raises the dog with his own children in his home. And this story follows a very interesting, almost Frankensteinian style story, but asks the question, if Dr. Frankenstein had accepted responsibility for his creature, would we still have the same result or not? This book was a really incredible, deep thinking book that I thought just added so much to the Frankenstein story and really modernized it a lot more than I expected. So if you happen to like the Frankenstein story at all, I would highly recommend picking up Sirius. Next, we get a book by Clifford Simak. Now, I know that Clifford Simak has become a little bit of a sci-fi booktube baby, and a lot of people have finally started hearing about him. But he has quite a lot of backlog works that a lot of people don't talk about beyond his most famous ones. And several of them have started to appear in some of the bookstores that I frequent because they have been reprinted. So this one is The Goblin Reservation. This is a Hugo nominee, although it's not really talked about because it is a sci fantasy story. This one really caught me in the bookstore because the back of the book says, an interstellar adventure of aliens, fairies, and time travel. What more do you need? This one follows a college professor who has left the planet via beam transportation and come back to find out that he was dead. Apparently, the beam transporter has made some kind of copy. Now, while he doesn't know if he's the copy or the original, he decides to go on a quest to try to figure out what happened to his life, and discovers that magical creatures may not have been as much of a figment of our imagination as we had all originally thought. And this was a fun book, not necessarily to be taken very seriously. I really had a good time with it, especially because I'm a fan of both fantasy and science fiction genres. So if you're somebody who enjoys both, this one I think should be talked about a lot more, and I had a really good time. This one probably gets my hourglass stamp of approval. Next up is another book series that I have only read the first one on, and this one is Ship Who Sang by Anne McCaffrey. This is one that doesn't quite stand the test of time, but I was able to look past some of the less than PC kind of comments on this one. We follow a woman named Helva who was somehow born deformed. They don't go into exactly what happened, but most of those people are offered the chance to go ahead and become a pilot, or essentially a biological AI for a lot of the ships that peruse the galaxy. And Helva takes them up on that opportunity, and she begins to seek the perfect pilot. Now, the relationship between a ship and her pilot are very special, kind of almost like a romantic relationship without the benefits. However, this one was just a fun, exciting adventure about what kinds of messes a ship can get into and seeking her pilot in all the wrong places. This book series, I've been told, continues down this path, and it is kind of a fun space romp adventure story that does become a little bit episodic. I really enjoyed the first one. However, doesn't quite hold up to the test of time in a lot of the politics and PC that is around now. So if you're a sensitive reader, maybe not for you. All right, the next book on this list is going to be one that I've talked about on my channel before, and that is H. Beam Piper's Little Fuzzy. This is actually a trilogy that I found in a used bookstore a long while ago, and I was really surprised at how much I liked this story. This one is very lighthearted about a man who moves to a planet because we have colonized the galaxy, at least for now. And he ends up discovering tiny fuzzy creatures who are crawling into his tent overnight. And as he discovers, these creatures may be a lot more sentient than he thought. And as he discovers whether or not they're sentient, he is faced with the legal side of trying to figure out how to prove sentience in a creature that has different intelligence than humans. Now, before you guys get too excited, this one is a little bit more superficial. Remember that it was published quite a long time ago, but I've had a really good time at reading through this trilogy, and I'm not the only one. Lots of other people have been really inspired by The Complete Fuzzy, which is the one that I own of all three books. But John Scalzi himself actually republished the story with the permission of H. Beam Piper's family, calling it Fuzzy Nation. I would say that the only difference between the original and the modern is that John Scalzi adds quite a bit of humor and sarcasm to the story. I didn't think that those things were required, and I actually prefer the original, so definitely you should check it out if you haven't already. Speaking of omnibus editions, I also happened to find a silly omnibus that I couldn't help but pick up called The Adventures of the Stainless Steel Rat by Harry Harrison. This is my old vintage hardback copy, and it actually contains 3 of the original books in this series, including The Stainless Steel Rat, The Stainless Steel Rat's Revenge, and The Stainless Steel Rat Saves the World. So this series is really episodic, but super fun. Think of it like 007, but earlier. And in space. Story follows Slippery Jim, who is a con man that's down on his luck, and ends up somehow accidentally getting punished by getting drafted into the military space police. And because of his particular expertise about conning, he ends up uncovering a cover-up about a planet that is building what looks to be a cargo ship on paper, but might actually be a warship, which is forbidden. He weasels his way into investigating the crime, and the adventure goes from there. These are super episodic. Some of them are a little bit more PC than others, but I would highly recommend this if you're not a sensitive reader, because they are so much fun and easy, tiny, quick reads in between some of the other series that I'm reading. So would recommend, definitely fun. The next book on the list is the reason for the Hourglass stamp of approval. This book could have been written last year. And this is one that I have sent a couple of my friends on my channel already, and that is John Wyndham's Trouble with Lichen. Now, I know that this is the new copy of it, but the older copies I checked don't have a UPC, so it still counts for this list. Trouble with Lichen is one of the lesser known John Wyndhams, and I don't understand why, because it covers everything that I love in science fiction. Well, maybe not everything, but most things. I was super pleasantly surprised, and it made me a John Wyndham fan for life. This book follows a female protagonist as she and a research partner discover sort of an immortal life while researching antibiotics. And the discovery isn't really the coolest part about this story. Instead, it's about how they should reveal their discovery to the public. And there is so much evaluation of should they and what are the consequences of some kind of invention like this. It was an incredible story. Again, like I said, it could have been written last year. And if you are a fan of John Wyndham, or if you've been thinking about reading one of his books, this is still my favorite John Wyndham. Next on the list is one that I don't think I have had a chance to talk about, and this is one of the Ace double books. Again, the front cover was ripped off because I accidentally ripped it off in my purse. Again, several of these books have been damaged, unfortunately, while filming this video. But this is Empire Star by Samuel Delany. This is a nice, quick read that was full of all kinds of twists and turns. It's full of some time travel, and he is asked to deliver a message. And what I can tell you about this story is that the main character is somewhat unlikable and kind of maybe a reflection of what Samuel Delany was idealizing at the time. However, the story itself was very cleverly done. It kind of confused me at the very, very beginning, but then as I continued to read, the twists and turns through this story utterly blew my mind, and the ending was absolutely chef's kiss, picture perfect. I really had a good time with Empire Star, and I can honestly say that this is the best Samuel Delany that I have read so far. I'm really glad that I was able to get a copy of this one because it was really fantastic. I'm sad to say that I don't feel the same way about the opposite story, so we're just not going to mention that one. Next on the list is one of my all-time favorite books that I didn't know about. It was my very first one. It's Downward to the Earth by Robert Silverberg. I had not read any Robert Silverberg when I first picked this book up. I did not even know that it was a very classic science fiction story, but this one is just so good. I felt like I had really found a diamond in the rough when I found this book. This is ultimately one of the best redemption stories I have ever read. We follow a man who is traveling back to a planet that humans have been kicked off of. And this is because there are elephant-like aliens who were treated like slaves for almost a generation. And we have finally recognized their sentience. This kind of seems to be a theme. And we finally left the planet. We got kicked off. And the man is returning to this planet to try to make amends for being one of the people who was a slave owner, was very cruel to the creatures, even though he knew they had intelligence. And he's trying to make amends. And the creatures decide to put him off on this specific quest to try to get him to make amends. And this one was really intelligent. It had apparently been inspired by Heart of Darkness, which is a book that I didn't particularly love, but boy, was this one so very good. I would highly, highly recommend it if you're a Silverberg fan at all. And if you haven't read Silverberg, in my opinion, this is the cream of his work. It is the best Silverberg I've read so far. And it definitely gets the Hourglass stamp of approval. Definitely don't want to forget that. The next book on this list is going to be Iceworld by Hal Clement. This book was just a fun, ruckus of a book that I had a really good time with. It follows an alien perspective as well as an Earth perspective, but it leans a lot more heavily into the alien perspective. This one is following an alien named Ken, and he gets recruited by this alien society to be a plant on a smuggler's crew, because this smuggler has found a very hyper addictive drug and they want to know where he's getting it and how to stop the import of this super addictive drug. And as we discover, we are taken to a planet where he is shown where this drug comes from. And he's also threatened with being exposed to the drug so that way his loyalties will stay with the smuggler. Of course, there are some pretty hard science fiction in this book, as he is attempting to try to solve how a sulfur-based life form like himself is able to come down to the cool planet of Earth, of course, where this drug is started. There are fun little tidbits in this book that were kind of predictive of the future in some ways, and I had a really good time with it. I will say that some of the scientific concepts drag the book a little bit more than maybe some of the other ones on this list, but I had such a good time with it that I had to mention. Next is going to be a book series that I liked so much I ended up buying the omnibus edition of, and that is James White's Hospital Station. This is one that I've never heard of before, but I had such a good time of because it's essentially a hospital in space, and it deals with all of the people who work at this hospital. They pride themselves on accepting any kind of race, species, or problem, but there's a lot of difficulties that go into treating races with different diseases and different problems in this hospital. Some are giant, some have special breathing needs, and we follow the several different doctors, nurses, and other staff members through this hospital system. And I liked it so much that I ended up getting the omnibus edition that is available on Amazon called Beginning Operations, which is the first 3 books. I am hoping that the second and the third books in this series continue to follow almost like some short story segments, because we just follow a couple of characters randomly throughout the story. We don't follow one particular doctor or nurse or janitor. And I've really enjoyed this series, maybe because I'm in the healthcare field, but I had a really good time with it, so I had to mention it. Next on this list is going to be Decision at Doona by Anne McCaffrey. This book is probably the most similar book that I've ever read to, like, let's say the Star Trek series or something like that. It was just so optimistically hopeful and almost naively so, but I really had a good time with it anyway. This one follows a group of colonists who are so excited to colonize a new planet that Earth has discovered. And Earth has been super overpopulated, so they're really excited to have some space of their own. When they get to this planet, of course, they discover that there may or may not be some sentient life on the planet, which by law will kick them off the planet, because the last time that happened, Earth discovered that you cannot cohabitate planets because spoilers. So what I can tell you about this really fun story is that the pilgrims and the colonizers are trying to do what's right, but they still really feel like they deserve this space. And so they're trying to decide what to do and how to handle it. And this story ends up being such a good, feel-good story that I had so many Star Trek vibes. I mean, I would highly recommend this story if you are looking for something to just uplift your spirits and you like that kind of colonizing, you know, maybe a little bit of naive kind of a storytelling that I feel like was very classic for some of these vintage science fiction era. I really had a good time with it and would strongly recommend, minus the fact that this back cover also got ripped out, along with several of the pages eaten by my dog. I'm really sad about it. Anyway, that does it for my giant list of vintage science fiction hidden gems. But I'm sure that there are more diamonds in the rough to be found. However, they're gonna have to be found after this video because I've already overwhelmed you with the number of books that I've listed here. If you are a fan of this kind of video, please make sure to comment, give me a thumbs up or a smiley face so that way I know I should make more videos like this in the future. And until next time, you guys, I'll see you in the next video.